everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Helen Sosłowski. I'm the events director for Oblong Books in the Hudson Valley. We're delighted to welcome this evening Dr. Renée Alsarraf with her new book, Sit, Stay, Heal. And she'll be talking this evening with Elisabeth Egan, who is an editor for the New York Times Book Review and an author herself. Before I introduce our guests, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. If you've not attended one of our events before and you'd like to leave a question for Renée, you can do so in the chat. There's also a Q&A module that you'll find at the bottom of your screen, and you can leave your questions in there as well. And we'll address those at the end of the conversation portion of the program. Best-selling author of Marley and Me, Josh Grogan, praises Sit, Stay, Heal as being written with grace and emotional honesty, and he says that it will live with you long after the last page. The book is available at both our stores or online from oblongbooks.com. I'll leave a link for you during the program in the chat. Dr. Renée Alsarraf has created 4 different veterinary oncology practices and led 3 veterinary radiation facilities. She's performed numerous veterinary clinical trials, co-authored peer-reviewed journal articles, and lectured both locally and on the national level. She lives in Montclair, New Jersey, and is married to a veterinary ophthalmologist. They have 1 son, whom she cherishes, as well as Dusty, her beloved, bossy 6-year-old female boxer who has been banished for the evening. So we're told. Elisabeth Egan is an editor at the New York Times Book Review. As I mentioned, she is also the author of A Window Opens. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Elisabeth, and we look forward to a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Renée, congratulations on being a first-time author. I want to just say before I have a really long list of questions, but for all of you who are watching right now, just also a little bit of housekeeping. If you have questions, feel free to leave them in the Q&A or in the chat, and I will be checking them towards the end of my conversation with Renée. As an editor at the Book Review, I interview a lot of authors. And I have a lot of friends who call me and say, oh, my friend wrote a book, will you talk to them? And that's how I met Renée. And 9 times out of 10, I'm always happy to talk to anyone who has a book coming out. But the minute I heard what Renée's book was about, and the minute I spoke to Renée on the phone, I started counting the days until this event, even before I read Sit, Stay, Heal. And it did not disappoint. It is incredibly moving and incredibly wonderful. So it's a real honor to be here tonight, Renée. Thank you for having me join you in conversation. I can't even tell you how excited I am to be chatting with you tonight from across town.
Thank you, Liz. So I usually make people cry, and I am holding back tears from what you just said. That's very, very kind. Thank you.
I mean it from the bottom of my heart. And I know this is a deeply, deeply personal story for you, both personally and professionally. And so I think I'd like to begin, if you don't mind, with what might be the hardest question of the night, which is for our audience tonight, some of whom I'm assuming have not had a chance to read your memoir yet. How would you describe what you write and what your story is?
So it's a true story. Every chapter is about a different patient of mine, a different dog patient, and either what that family learned from their dog or what I learned. And then woven through all the chapters is my backstory. While the initial thought could be that it's sad because I'm a veterinary oncologist, therefore I'm treating cancer day in and day out. And the irony or the stomach punch is that I myself then developed the C word. How's that for dysfunction? Can't say it for myself. But I think for me, that's more in the background. And instead, what I hope the reader gets out of this is a bunch of life lessons. Someone recently read the book And she has a 5-year-old Westie who's completely healthy and darling named Oscar, she told me. And she said, after reading it, I felt like I was a better pet parent. She felt that she was a better person and she felt happier. And that just warmed my soul because that's what I'm hoping. Mm-hmm. For me, I think the resounding theme in the book is that that dogs for us are not just support, but they are incredible guides for whomever is struggling, and we all struggle at times. And I hope the book shows the enormous power of the human-animal bond and what it plays in our life.
It does.
Thank you.
Straight up. I can just tell you right now, it does. Tell me about the moment when you knew you were going to write a book. I know that you, excuse me, I know that you were writing emails to friends and family, excuse me, while you were undergoing your own journey. At what point did you realize that you wanted to turn your story and your patient stories into a book?
So for the audience today, I had never done any social media or anything, which I realize, is crazy, but I took to writing these emails because it was too draining to continue to have conversation after conversation about where I was in my treatment, how I was feeling, and what started as a smaller group morphed into about 75 people. These emails that I would write, I would often get back replies, and they became my lifeline, giving me support, encouraging words, and I clung to them. So many people, though, also wrote, have you ever thought about writing a book? You really should write a book. And I had always wanted to write a book, but I blew that off because as a veterinarian, it's not just a job. It's kind of not even just a profession. For me, it's who I am and how I identify myself. So I never even thought about doing anything aside from veterinary medicine, which tends to be all-encompassing. I finished my treatment. I was convalescing. I might bump into a neighbor at the local Whole Foods. They would say, have you started your book? And of course, I still blew them off. Mm-hmm. And then one weekend, my husband and I went away. We were at a hotel, and at the hotel door, they brought us a newspaper, which, I don't get a newspaper. It was sort of a luxury. It was fun. The only parts that I read, though, are the comics and the horoscope. Mm-hmm. And my horoscope said, you should begin writing your book today. And 2 days later, I started because I figured the universe can't knock any louder.
Right. How did you begin? Did you just open up a blank Word document on your computer?
Oh, so I'm more of a paper and pencil girl. Okay. I still have a paper calendar,
yes.
Right?
I have a paper calendar too.
I covet my paper calendar. So I just got a really pretty binder or, sort of notebook. And I just started listing all of the dogs that had made, all of my patients that had made such a difference in my life. And I wrote down why they did. And what I ended up with is volumes, right? I could have written about so many other pets, but I chose those, I don't even know, 10 or 12, because I thought that their stories sort of paralleled mine, going through what I was going through at the time. And their lessons were the most obvious without coming out and saying what each lesson actually is.
Did you find the process of writing cathartic? Did it help you heal, in the aftermath of this ordeal? Like I come to this conversation as a lifelong writer. It's always been something I turn to. If I ran into a group of friends from my grade school, I think they would probably remember that I loved writing. I bet your friends from elementary school remember you as an animal lover. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
So had you ever, had you ever written before, and what was your takeaway from that experience?
So the only things that I've ever written would be peer-reviewed journal articles or a chapter, but those are in veterinary books, completely different side of my brain, I'm sure. Silly thing I remember, golly, I think I was in 6th grade or maybe middle school at the time. My girlfriend and I mailed back a book that we were writing together back and forth, but I'm sure kids do that all the time. But I did say in another life that I would want to be a writer or a teacher. And I think I've sort of hopefully combine that with the lessons. And I think even as a veterinarian, because I'm teaching people about the disease or how to care for their animal, that also combines things together.
Well, I was thinking as I was reading, so much of being a writer is observing the world around you and noticing what other people may not notice.
Right.
And I've never been a veterinary oncologist, but I'm assuming when your patients aren't able to speak, you're also in a position where you're digesting information and processing it in such a way that I would think is kind of reminiscent of being a writer. So I feel like you were well set up to become one. What would you say is the most important lesson? Like, what was the one that hit you over the head in like a lightning bolt as you thought of it?
It depends on the day that you ask me and where I am in my own headspace. I would say there are two. I would say for one of them is that dogs are never judgmental, right? They have a whole host of emotions. They're happy, they're sad, they're eager. They might even be afraid sometimes, but they never look at us in judgment. They don't care about our work history or if I said something foolish or had a misstep. And I know that it's human nature to be a little judgy, and yet we're all so much better off if we're not. But I think where for me it really hits home is that I have this voice in my head, and she's not always so nice to me. In fact, she can kind of be pretty nasty. And yet if I use my dog as my guide or my mirror, my dog would never say those things. My dog doesn't have that voice. And it's just, if I can at least stop it when she starts, it makes me happier. It doesn't try to push my cork down, right? It lets me float, which is better.
I love that idea.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I think the other one that's just kind of in the forefront lately for me is that dogs are pack animals, right? And that's how they survived in the wild. They relied on each other for food, for security and protection. They would lay on each other for warmth. People buy weighted blankets now because you want that feeling. And yet we have our dogs to do that for us. Dogs have evolved over thousands of years to be a part of our pack. Initially, man would throw away bones of some carcass that we just ate and they'd pick the little, meat off. But then they evolved to help us with tending to our flocks and hunting. They've now evolved to help us like service dogs to give some independence to special needs people or the police. But I know having my dog in my pack makes my life so much better. In fact, just the other day, I had 2 events and I came home and I was exhausted. And our dog is not allowed up on the furniture, although we have a don't ask, don't tell policy, because when we leave the house, there is evidence that she's been up on the furniture. But again, don't ask, don't tell. But I put a big blanket on myself and she crawled up. And I ended up telling my husband to go to bed without me because it felt so good that I didn't want to stop that feeling. And I think, again, if we take this all one step further, we as people are so much better off as a pack, supporting each other and lifting each other up. And again, taking our cue from our four-legged friends.
Mhm. Did you find that when you were sick, and we're at a similar stage of life, and you had a teenager, and that's a very specific moment, I think, as a parent to feel vulnerable, because you're already in the process of separating a little bit from your child, and then to have this scary diagnosis on top of it, at a point not to impose my own assumptions on your son, but I could imagine my kids slightly pulling away in that scenario and being a little bit afraid.
Mhm.
And I know I can't 100% imagine, so I'm not making assumptions, I
All good.
promise. I often think, even though I'm a very social person and a pack person, that I could imagine myself in that scenario separating from the pack and becoming extremely private and kind of going dark.
Mhm.
How did you balance the impulse to continue connecting with your pack and bring the lessons of your practice into your survival at that point, with what I could imagine would be sort of an innate instinct to protect your privacy?
That's a great question. So I am by nature an introvert, a social introvert, but when I take that test, I'm on that extreme side of being an introvert. But I realized, and I'm someone who loves to help and do and give, and I am not as good at receiving at all.
You can so relate.
Right?
Yeah.
But I realized right up front that I wasn't going to be able to do this alone. And I feared for my husband and my son, especially as a boy and as a teenager, God help us all, that they would need support, or that I didn't want to be a burden and a bother on them. And while they were great, not trying to discount them, my girlfriends were absolutely invaluable, best pack that I could ever ask for. Kind of astounding,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think some of that has to do with where we live. I feel on the brink of tears, but I feel very lucky to be part of this community in Montclair, New Jersey. And that's part and parcel with the place.
Yes.
Would you say that you drew more strength from the animal kingdom or the human kingdom at that time? Or is it hard to declare?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I relied on my girlfriends for things.
Yeah.
Bringing dinner so that I knew, I jokingly say with my son, we have first dinner and then we have second dinner, right? Because I don't know where he puts it. It's not fair. I'm kind of jealous. I'd love to eat that much. So that was provided, rides were provided. But for my battle cry in my own head, for my emotions, it was all the animals. It really was. In fact, they set the bar higher for me, and I used them as my recovery role models.
I don't want to give too much of the book away, but your dog was also going through a very hard time. So your dog was also getting rides to,
yes.
I won't even get into the details because I want people to know, but there are many threads in this story. Tell me about, I don't want to ask you to mine anything that you're not comfortable with, but tell me about your decision to use the C word rather than the other word in the book,
Mhm.
and how that, where you are on that now.
So in my veterinary practice, I have no problem saying cancer.
Yeah.
But when it came to it for me, I didn't want to own that word in any way, shape, or form. I didn't ask for that word. And I still can't say it. Initially, it was a capital C word in my head. And now, whenever I think of it, it's always in the lowercase because I'm not going to give it that power. I did end up taking a bit of a medical leave from work. And the other thing that I combine with that, the term, the C word, is, excuse me, everyone who's listening, the middle finger.
Yeah. Good. I fully support that.
Right. And if
This
we
is
were
an adult audience.
yes, okay, good. And so under the table right now, I'm doing what you think I'm doing.
Yeah, good.
Which is just that fight that I had to do. And even so, getting back to when I went back after, and I would be talking to one of the pet parents, and if they knew, some of them knew about my struggle, others didn't. In my lab coat was my middle finger coming out because I just couldn't do it.
That's amazing. Did your publisher at all push back? Not about the middle finger, but about the C word?
No, I think because they knew
that was your process.
It was my process.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
One thing I was wondering as I was reading is, every time I'm going for my first physical tomorrow in an embarrassing amount of, I haven't been in a long time because of the pandemic. And you sign the form about your HIPAA regulation, whatever it's called. I'm knocking wood just because I'm superstitious, but
me too.
How does that really in a veterinary practice? I mean, did you change the names of your patients, or did you, in many cases, your bond with the pet parents, as you call them, is so evident, it practically jumps off the page as another whole set of close relationships in addition to your pack. But do those pet families know they're in the book?
They do. So legally, originally I had the names. And it's funny, in the veterinary world, when we're writing about an animal, the pet's first name always goes in quotation marks. And I remember my Tina Bennett, my literary agent, she's like, why do you keep putting these in quotation marks? And I'm like, that's the normal way that we do things. So that was different. But legally, I had to change the names of all of the families, of all of the pets. The names that I didn't have to change were my son's, my husband's, and my own dogs. But let me think. Four of the families know that they are in the book. They've actually, two of them have come to some events. One of them brought their dog, the bloodhound, who
you've totally immortalized.
Yes, and it's been great. And the other one was, just because you've read it already, in the first chapter, the girl Kathy, she was able to come, and that was really special.
Oh, that makes me really, really happy.
Yeah.
I felt very connected to both the animals and the people. And also I've been to that office, so I could picture everything.
Yeah. Actually, I misspoke. 5. And probably the more I sit here, I'll think of more, but 5 of the families know.
What were you, this is a little bit of a pivot, but I'm always curious about the writing process. What were you reading while you were writing the book? And what were you watching or listening to anything that was particularly inspiring? And also, just to tack on a bunch of questions, what was your writing process? Like, how many hours a day? Okay. What kind of snacks were you eating? Where were you in the house? Tell us the whole picture.
Okay. Snacks are always the best thing in the world, right? And a dinner of appetizers is my jam. Mm-hmm. But once I started, I couldn't stop. I loved it. I tried to, because I'm type A, write 1,000 words a day. Sometimes I would only write 750. Other times I would write 1,500, but it did average 1,000 words a day. I wrote every single day. And
I have to interrupt you for anyone who's watching who's not a writer. I write 200 words a day. And that's my job. I also edit, but like 1,000 words a day is a lot. So keep going.
Okay. I was in my office, which was the kitchen, right? Yeah. And I couldn't read any single book during that process. I couldn't listen to music at all because I didn't want it to affect my emotions, and they would. I would sometimes get really crabby if Peter came in and, was wondering when dinner was or something like that. I'm like, I'm in the zone. I'm still writing. But it was really great. It was exhausting, emotionally exhausting. I felt like I ran a marathon, even though my rear end had been planted in that seat at the kitchen table for however long it took. It was extremely tiring. How I refill, aside from maybe a walk with my dog or something like that, are sitcoms, right? Something that I don't have to, have the tug of emotion. I might have a little chuckle. And so that was what I would retreat to, some television sitcoms in the evening.
You strike such a unique balance between very intimate and quite funny and poignant. And it's really rare. I read a ton of memoirs. It's rare to talk to a first-time author who strikes that balance so well. I felt you let me into some very personal parts of your life. And I'm wondering if you had certain boundaries that you did not cross in writing about your personal life so intimately.
So I am someone who hates small talk. Like I just don't like it. If I can't have that deep, meaningful conversation, I'm not very good in that social situation. I'm just not. So I think for me, it was just second nature. In general, there was no boundary except two, which one was negated. The first was at the time that I was writing it, my son didn't want me to use his name whatsoever. And he also didn't want me to make up a fictitious name. So the entire manuscript was my son this, my son that. And I would let him read little excerpts or a paragraph here and there. And he still felt that I, made him into a child and he's, a teenager. But once he read chapter 9, which is, that was our chapter with Newton, he said, Mom, I get it. I really get it. And he wanted me to use his name. So it was a boundary, but it didn't last. I think the other boundary, and people, what we talk on this Zoom stays on this Zoom. By the end of all of this, of my chemotherapy and our dog, my husband got pretty spent, pretty burned out with it. And it was difficult. Like I could tell that he was struggling. He still tried his hardest to be supportive, but that's not always maybe his role that he takes in our family. He's also an extremely private person. And so I didn't reveal that by the end.
Yeah. Well, I don't know your husband, but I thought if you could pass on the message that this random woman who interviewed you thought he came across so well. I thought he's an absolute hero. Yeah. And I can only imagine, I've only been in the role of a caretaker with parents, but it's hard. It's draining.
It is. Yeah.
I can only imagine with a spouse. So
it is. And he was working full time and wasn't used to some of the kid things. And it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
And also having, I have this a little bit with my husband because I write personal things, and there's a dance you do. And I'm very aware of what he's comfortable with and what he's not comfortable with.
Yeah.
And I try not to cross that line, but your stories are intertwined. It's hard.
Yes.
How have the past 2 weeks been for you? And what was it like to walk into, I'm assuming maybe Watchung Books here in Montclair, and hopefully at some point Oblong Books.
Yes.
So what is it like to walk in and see your book on the shelf?
Yeah. So first of all, I love Oblong Books. Before our session, I was letting them know that we go at least twice a year. We often go, to an antique show up there, and just always stop and always come home with a bag full because it's just the best. The last 2 weeks have been absolutely fantastic. They have felt like a gift from the heavens. Last night I was at a wellness seminar in Connecticut, and I just had a little conversation on the stage. And when the keynote speaker was there, who does TED Talks, she had everyone initially close their eyes, and she was speaking about joy. And she wanted everyone to go back to a time when they had profound joy. And, through her words, she guided everyone through it. And I went with a girlfriend. And later on the way home, I said, to my friend, what was your place? What was your joy place? And she's like, I just don't do that. I'm just not comfortable with that. I'm like, okay. And she asked me what my joy was. And I said, I pictured being right there at that wellness seminar, getting to experience this incredible thing. Harper One and Harper Collins has been so supportive. It's been magical.
To me, the ultimate pack experience is the book lover pack, the independent bookstore pack. Like, you can walk into any independent bookstore in this country and feel part of something. For me, that's practically my religion, and that sense of camaraderie and that sense of support and love for a shared thing. I know I sound like I'm on a fundraising drive for PBS, but that's my little plug for independent bookstores.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn in a few minutes. I see people are starting to put questions in the chat, and I really appreciate it. I'm just giving one more little reminder. If you have a question, drop it in there. I'm going to turn to them in a few minutes. Renée, we are all living in a time of uncertainty right now, and we have been for 2.5 years. How do you, this experience, I'm sure, has introduced a level of uncertainty to your life that I would imagine has not been easy to get used to. How do you manage that? And do you have any advice for the rest of us who are?
I'm going to answer that question. And so remind me if I forget. When you, about 2 questions ago, said how you're going for your routine and everything, I just want to say, people, I'm the poster child as to why you should go. Yep. I went to the gynecologist religiously every year. I would go every August. For whatever reason, that summer in 2018, I made my appointment for June. And the week of that appointment, I almost canceled it because, no offense to any gynecologists, but I thought, why do I want to go do that anytime, sooner than I normally do? I had never missed a period. I hadn't lost a single pound. I wasn't lethargic aside from the typical working mom tired, no clinical signs. And it had already metastasized, right? So that's my plug.
I'm giving the middle finger under my computer.
Awesome, right? The double one, the double middle finger. So it is hard to face your own mortality when you're, at the time, 51 and had a adolescent. It is hard to face your own mortality every single time you have to have your CAT scans and your blood work. I think one of the other lessons from dogs, and I do try to adopt it, and I think it pertains so much to these trying times that we're in right now, is that dogs practice mindfulness. They live in the moment, right? I might go to a spa with my girlfriend for a long weekend and think I'm all good and I'm gonna, have a different life and a different attitude. And by Tuesday, it's out the window. But if I can use my dog and if I can remind myself that they're just happy every day that the sun comes up, or they're happy to get to go for a walk. And even when it came to my recovery, after I was done with treatment from the chemotherapy, I had a side effect of lymphedema. That's the double middle finger. And it made the scale go up a fair amount. And here I had struggled so hard to get to live, but I was lamenting those days. I hated the fact that I had gained weight and had to go up a couple of sizes. But how foolish is that, right? I'm wasting these good days. And even though there are so many things that we're all dealing with right now, we have to focus on the good. And that's what gets us through. And that's what helps us and gives us strength to get through when it's really tough and when an issue's truly hitting home.
I love that answer. I love that answer. Thank you for your honesty. Before I turn to take some questions, I'm going to introduce a moment of humor, I hope. As a cat person, I think I told you from the get-go, the first time we talked, I am first and foremost a cat person. Where is your love for the felines in this book?
So there is a cat.
Okay.
Yes, there is a cat in there. We had a cat. We've had cats. Unfortunately, my son has asthma and is allergic to cats.
I did know that. Okay.
Yeah, so that doesn't work. Yep. And I am someone who likes the really crotchety, old, like tortoiseshell cats. Yeah. The crabbier, the better. We get each other. Yeah. I could have written about cats as well, aside from just the one. But there were more lessons from the dogs and the dog people. And I don't know if that's just the case, or maybe if sometimes some of the cat parents didn't share as much.
Interesting, because they're mirroring their beast.
Yes.
I always think of the dogs as like the boyfriend who calls too much. They're like desperate, and the cats are like the cool friend.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like the older friend who like takes you to a rated R movie before you're
right.
Okay,
right.
Renee, I'm clicking on the chat because I have some questions here, but I still have I have many other questions for you. So no pressure to anyone if you don't have other questions. These are nice questions. Somebody said, I can relate to this so much because I was diagnosed with cancer about a year after my dog was. Different types of cancer for each of us. When he was diagnosed, he came home and put one paw in front of the other and got on with life. And so did I. He didn't pace around the house going, what am I going to do? Neither did I. Best of luck in your continued recovery. I mean,
thank you. And is that a female? I'm like, can you tell? Like, girlfriend, that's awesome. If I could hug you right now, I would.
I love that. And then somebody asked, can you talk about a patient, maybe not in the book, and give an example of how you have experienced the dog-patient unique relationship? And actually, the person who made the first comment, just said, yes, I am female. And the moderator would just like to send you my best. I'm not going to say your name, but thank you for participating and contributing.
Yes. Thank you so much. So for the second question, there was a gentleman that would come in, and he was probably about my age. He had a little Shih Tzu that had lymphoma. And that dog did great, treated with chemotherapy. She beat the odds, did well for a year and a half. But every single time the gentleman came in, if I asked him a question, he would just look down at the ground. He would utter maybe a word or two that was barely audible. And I thought, oh my goodness, maybe he's really shy. But after a while, I just accepted it for what it is, right? And unfortunately, after about a year and a half, the dog lost the battle. And about a month later, I received a big manila envelope in the mail at work. And in it was a handwritten letter from that gentleman and photographs. And he finally opened up. He told me that this dog had been his daughter's dog, and she had passed away at the age of 23. He didn't say why she had died. I got the feeling that she had struggled a lot, and that they had gotten this dog to be her companion, and the dog never left her side. And so he could not give up on the dog, because that was such a strong tie to his daughter that he loved so much. What he never shared with me in all the visits is that he and his wife couldn't afford the chemotherapy. And so he took a second job. He worked the midnight shift at the local grocery store, cutting up cold cuts for the next morning for the shoppers in order to pay. And I guess there's a lesson here. People, tell your veterinarians, the majority of us are a bunch of softies and bleeding hearts. You know, if there's a way that we can help or work around things, we will, because we want to help.
I love that. I guess people who go into your line of work are not like cutthroat. You know, you're right. I don't know why that made me think of the fact that at least my animals are real creatures of habit, and they sit in the same spot in the sun at the same time every day. And my dog, like when we walk to the end of our walkway, he has a certain route he likes to go, and he's not terribly well trained, so we just follow exactly where he wants to go. We don't call the shots on the walk. If there are any trainers watching, I don't want to hear from you. I'm wondering if that is also your experience with most of the animals that you've had or patients that you've seen, and did that inclination to create a routine and create a pattern and keep following the routine, if you did that, did it help you through your treatment and that incredible time of stress?
So I don't know that I had a routine, but I tried to leave no stone unturned. When I would go through chemotherapy, I did this healthy meditation tape. There was a friend of mine who is a chef, and she made me homemade 72-hour bone broth. And it made my husband gag. And it didn't make me gag, because I knew that it would hopefully help me to be stronger, to have, you know, good cell counts and all that good stuff. A lesson, I guess, in the book that isn't spelled out at all is one of the differences between human medicine and veterinary medicine is when you're at the veterinary clinic, often your dog is at the end of their leash, wanting to sniff someone or smell something, or you sit next to someone and you might strike up a conversation. And I would often find, I would even introduce my oncology clients to each other. And it becomes this I don't know, therapy room, right? Or a support system. And people would often then make their appointments for the same day and time the next week.
Renée, that's amazing.
Yes. But at the Human Center, it didn't matter if you came alone or with one person or your whole crew. Nobody spoke. Everyone just sat there looking down at their phone or, at their shoes. And I thought, well, that's crazy. And so I would talk to whomever sat next to me. I figured that was on them from sitting next to me. And I was always happy to share my story, but only if they asked. I really didn't want to share my story. I wanted to learn from them. And I learned so many things that helped me weather the storm and helped me in my recovery. I would always check with my physicians before doing something. And they'd be like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. Oh, yeah, that can help. And I'm thinking, why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
Right. So I had all of these things that I did to try to help physically, mentally, emotionally. And so I guess if that was a pattern, then that was my pattern.
By our age, we've all had a friend in a time of need for different reasons. For you, what was helpful from your friends? And what was not helpful?
Can I be this is a horrible thing to say, but as you all know from my book, I'm super honest. What wasn't helpful was if I met with someone who had gone through their own battle with the C word, and it was right when I was diagnosed, hearing all about their battle. It was just scary. It didn't help me.
Yeah.
That didn't help because and some people that I don't even know reached out to me on social media now that I have social media.
Yeah.
And right, because I was told by HarperCollins, you have to have social media. And they've said, so-and-so, my friend is going through this. Any words of advice? My words of advice are everyone does it their own way. There is no wrong way to do it. You can do it kicking and screaming and crying. You can do it headstrong, whatever gets you there. That's the best way. Things that were very helpful were meals. I thought, oh, they'll be fine. My husband and son can make food, or, the teenagers love to order out anyway, so they'll do that. It wasn't about that. The meals were medicine for my body, but they were actually love from my girlfriends and my neighbors. They really made a difference. The rides in to and from the cancer treatment center. I even remember telling some girlfriends, well, I can just drive to you first. You don't have to backtrack and come here first. And they were adamant. No, you know what? If we're going to give you a ride, we're going to give you a ride. And I remember while I was going through it and I was drained and I kept this to myself, I thought, thank God I didn't have to drive from Montclair to Upper Montclair, right? 10 minutes, because it would have been too much. I think pride goes out the window when you're really not feeling well. And as embarrassing as it is to admit, some of the chemotherapy drugs actually cause severe bone and joint pain. And it was hard just to walk at times. And girlfriends, sometimes not even my besties, would come and they rubbed my legs. And it helped so much. And I'm thinking, I've really hit rock bottom because I've been in my pajamas for 4 days and what's left of my hair is plastered to my head. But that helped. The emails that I would get back after I would send out an email telling everyone where I was in the process helped. Flowers helped. Yeah.
This is a little bit of a pivot, but what is your advice to somebody who is watching right now, who has a story of their own to tell and maybe they're a lawyer and maybe they're an accountant, maybe they're a third grade teacher and they don't feel that they have a book in them. What what is your advice to that person about getting started?
That it doesn't matter. If you take a cue from a dog, right? They don't care. And just, at least for me, I think if you are completely honest and open, you'll find that once you start, it just flows, especially if it's not a novel, because I feel sorry for my husband. I have a really good memory. It is a blessing and a curse because, if you're in an argument,
dredge up the old information,
right?
I'm like that too.
Yes, but I could hear the conversations that I had with the specific families. I could hear their tone and their phrases. And so if you want to write a book, say if you are a lawyer, about your law practice or about a case or something like that, just sit and remember and start typing. For me also, I had to type the chapter, and then I would go in and add more details and then more details. And so it became a layering process.
Yeah. Funny, you are just really clearly an instinctual writer. I think of that as building the scaffolding. And I go in and I build the building, but maybe that's, I don't know how buildings are built, but that's how, when I write, I always think of the scaffolding first.
Yeah.
I guess you build the building before whatever, but
that makes sense, right?
Go in and fill it in.
Right. You put the beams on first, or
a very helpful, maybe a frame is a better way to think of it.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think that's a very common approach to writing.
Okay.
Just because I'm a fellow mother of a teenage boy, if you don't mind my asking, what was your son's response to the final book? I mean,
to the final book.
Yeah.
He's a guy who keeps his cards close to his chest.
Yeah, I get
right. Which drives moms, for me especially, crazy. But I do promise that one does get better as they get older. He's really proud, and he's sort of like, dang, you
That's
hit
the
it.
Perfect reaction.
Yeah, you hit it out of the park in his mind. It's been really kind of neat.
You did hit it out of the park, Renee.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I just have a couple other, I'm looking at my list of questions because I know I'm going to miss something. Have you heard from, I know it hasn't been out in the world for that long, but what has the response been so far from strangers, from the public on your new social media accounts?
It's been wonderful. What has been surprising is I think, all right, it's going to help someone struggling with something. It's going to appeal to the dog lover, the animal lover. It's going to maybe appeal to the mom, vibe. But I've gotten people that have reached out on social media that have said things, and I'm not even good with, I call it that little paper airplane, like in Instagram, whatever that is, or DMing in Facebook.
I don't even know.
Yeah. And I am surprised at how far and wide it's helping. Someone reached out, someone that I knew in elementary school, right? Never had contact. Doesn't actually even live in the United States anymore. And her father had passed away from the C word in February. And she's obviously my age because we went to school together. And she dutifully, lovingly went to every chemo appointment, went to every radiation appointment. But he was a very stoic man who kept his feelings inside. And she shared with me that she struggled since he's passed because she just never really knew how he felt or what it was like for him in the process because he would never open up. And she said that it helped her so much to heal in reading the book because she felt that she finally understood how her dad must have felt. And that meant the world to me that she said that.
That is the ultimate compliment.
Yeah.
Do you feel now that it is between hardcover, it's on a shelf all around the country, around the world, do you feel a sense of closure having told this story, or do you feel, is there a sequel in you? Tell me about how you feel.
So before this was ever published, my mantra was, I want it just to do well enough so that I can write another book. I'm too type A and driven to just write a book for myself, right? I want it to be out in the world. But what my goal is for this book is to do good in the world and to help a lot of people. And I truly, truly hope it does. That is my goal for the book.
That's an admirable goal. And I feel comfortable saying I think you've achieved it. I have one more question I would like to ask Renée, and it involves, I just want to read a few lines from the conclusion of the book, which they really spoke to me. And then I have a question. In this year, I feel weird reading this in your voice, but this is Renée speaking. This is Liz Egan speaking as Renée. In this year, I have acquired more scars than I'd ever wish on anyone. I may have had to battle to get these new scars, but I wear them proudly. In the medical world, a scar is said to remodel and reorganize, getting smaller and less noticeable with time. I am hopeful that with time, my scars will be less emotionally painful, but that the good that came from them will remain. And my final question is, given the lag time between when you wrote those words and today, is there anything you would add?
I think I would let those words stay or lie as they are. But in my head, I think there are a few more sentences, and that I don't really know how to say it. I don't want to say divine intervention, because that, I got the C word. That's nothing great. But I do believe that the heavens are smiling down on me and helping me to make something that was horrible a good thing.
Let's leave it there. Okay. I'm sending you all my best, and I cannot wait to meet you in Whole Foods and give you a huge hug.
I would like that.
A huge honor. Thank you so much, Renée.
Absolutely. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. And thanks to Oblong Bookstores.
Oh, it's been our absolute pleasure. Thank you, Renée. Thank you for sharing, being brave enough to share your story with us all. It is very compelling. It is heartrending and heartwarming at the same time. And Liz, thank you so much. That was you conducted a great conversation there. Before we leave, I'd like to thank Louise Braverman of HarperCollins, who helped us make this event possible, and to remind all of you that copies of Sit, Stay, Heal are available at both our stores in Millerton and in Rhinebeck, and online at oblongbooks.com. And you can also purchase copies of the audiobook, which is narrated by Renée herself from Libro FM, and I put the link for that in the chat. Thank you all for spending your evening with us. Thank you for writing such a wonderful book, Renée, and I wish you all a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Congratulations.
Bye.